Aloha, I'm Nahua Gillows, the board chair for the Hawaii Island Economic Development Board. Our mission is to provide and promote private sector support and expertise for balanced growth in Hawaii County. Since 2005, one of our major initiatives includes developing and publishing the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, commonly known as the CEDS, Hawaii Island's Economic Roadmap Moving Forward. We work with other economic development boards on Oahu, Kauai, and Maui to contribute to the overall State of Hawaii Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. Today's Native Hawaiian Perspectives webinar is the fourth in a series with more to follow. These webinars are designed to bring fresh Native Hawaiian voices and new perspectives forward and contribute to today's issues and discussions. Without further ado, today's moderator is Hawaii Island Economic Development Board's Executive Director, Jackie Hoover. Born and raised on the Big Island, Jackie currently serves on the Military Native Hawaiian Advisory Council, State of Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative Steering Committee, Hawaii Aerospace Advisory Committee, and numerous other boards and committees and commissions. Welcome, Jackie.
Aloha and mahalo, everyone. Aloha and mahalo for that great introduction, Nahua. Today's webinar is on Native Hawaiian Perspectives, who speaks for Native Hawaiians. When Native Hawaiian groups don't agree, how are disagreements resolved? And for those of you who have not tuned in previously, we offer these perspectives in a talk story method or talk story format, with me as moderator offering some prompting questions. At this point, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists. We're very honored to have them join us today. And all of you received their bios, so in order to save time for our talk story, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kelii Akina, Dr. Michael Chun, Mr. Ivan Lui-Kwan, and also Mr. James Stone. Welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. So we wanted to start our discussion today, and this of course is a very broad topic, but we thought it would give you an opportunity to speak and share your perspectives. And I wanted to start with asking a question, and perhaps James, if I could ask you to start off the conversation, is there a perception that Hawaiians are a collective rather than individuals who may have some shared heritage, tradition, values, et cetera? And perhaps we could start our discussion at that point.
I suppose, broadly speaking, aloha, Jackie, mahalo for inviting me to participate. So I think broadly speaking, we all recognize that there were indigenous people in Hawaii developed a sophisticated culture, probably for a period of over 1,000 years. And that culture, its traditions, its customs are identifiable as Hawaiian. Mm. The specific question posed as to who speaks for it, that's a tougher question. You know, there is no political, unified, organized group currently for or labeled Hawaiians, and so it's a diverse group without a specific, I think, unified leadership or entity.
Yeah, you know, if I can, you know, when I was first saw the announcement and learned of the topic, who speaks for Hawaiians, you know, my initial reaction was that we speak for Hawaiians. And when I say we, I mean, I speak for me, Kimo speaks for himself, Kelii, Ivan. I think that, you know, that was my initial reaction, that we do. Now we have, obviously we have spokespersons for groups of Hawaiians who share a common interest, whether it's Kalai Loa or it's Hana. They're around common interests or common goals or common issues. They may be one or two spokespersons, but I think that for me, when I react to that particular question, who speaks for Hawaiians? I think like any other group of people, we do we speak for ourselves, and I would ask the question too, like who speaks for the Aolis, who speaks for the Japanese, and so that was I thought that's kind of my initial thinking when we first talked about this webinar.
Jackie, if I could add something, I'd appreciate that. Just first of all, let me say a mahalo to the Hawaii Island Economic Board. It's really great to be here with Michael Chun and Ivan Kwan and Keaka Stone. I'm very honored to be in your presence. Such great leaders in our community. I think that there are many perceptions, but the reality is there's more than one thing going on. At the root level, we're like the kalo plant. The taro itself, kalo, has a root. And there, in that root, we have the same essence. There is something about being Hawaiian, being Kanaka Maoli, that unites us together. But when it breaks through the surface, we have these different leaves going different directions, each individual. And so there is a tremendous amount of diversity in the Hawaiian community. And I think it would be a wrong perception to see us all as one thing. At the root, we have the essence of what it is to be of Hawaii, Kapo'e Hawaii. But when it comes into our emergence into the world, we're very different. We're very individualistic. We have many different directions. And that's that wonderful, wonderful diversity that makes up who we are.
So again, I'd also like to thank the Hawaii Island Economic Development Board for having us. Well, I'm just honored to be with these other panelists. In response to the first question, Jackie, I think the reason there's a perception that Hawaiians are a collective group rather than individuals is because, for several reasons. One is that we have a shared heritage, we have the same traditions, we have the same values. And I think what we share in common as Indigenous people is a very unjust history. So I think that's something we have in common with other Indigenous people. The other reason I think that we're seen as a group as opposed to being individuals is that many non-Hawaiians do not know the Hawaiian community up close. And so I go to New Zealand quite a bit, and I think the non-Maori look at the Maori the same way because they don't have the same insight into the community. On the second question as to who speaks for Hawaiians, I think I agree with everybody else that nobody really speaks for the Hawaiians, and in large part because there's so many different groups and of Hawaiians. They're like the SHA, the Sovereign Council of the Hawaiian Homestead Associations, OHA, and Dr. Akina is a trustee at OHA, the Native Hawaiian Chamber of Commerce, the Royal Trust, and Hawaiian Civic Clubs, Council for Traditional Native Hawaiian Healers, and so on. Lots of different organizations, so a lot of different voices, and even within the different organizations, I think Dr. Akina can attest that they don't all have the same point of view as trustees on the board of OHA. Dr. Chun, was a president of Kamehameha Schools, and he also can attest to the fact that all the students, the parents, the teachers, they may come from the same organization, but they have very different points of view.
Thanks so much, everyone. Those are very interesting and mindful, thought-provoking insights. So if we could segue, are all Hawaiians equal, and should all Hawaiians have a say on specific projects on an island? For example, should Oahu resident Hawaiians have a say for specific issues or projects on Kauai or Molokai, for example?
Yeah, my response to that is it depends. You know, for example, you know, if we talk about depleting the resources of Molokai, I think you know, Molokai, those who live there, those who farm, those who hunt, those who do, you know, they are stewards, and you know, we from another place, you know, we need to honor and respect that. And but then, you know, there are other. Take for example Waikiki. I think that Waikiki is a different issue. Or Kalaeloa, for example, you know, another one. It's on Oahu, but I think it affects all Hawaiians, and it has, you know, so I think that that would invite conversations from, you know, the broader Hawaiian Native Hawaiian community. So, you know, when I think about that, for me it depends upon what we're talking about. You know, the issue I watching the newscast of all of the traffic that was going down to Hana, and you know how it's impacting the community there. And I think it's very important for that community to have a you know, a bigger say in terms of how that is managed. And but as I watched that, you know, I saw as you know, that it was a business that was, you know, thriving business that was creating part of the traffic, and I believe they were Native Hawaiians who were operating that, and you know, they need to have a big say there too. I don't think I have, you know, being from Oahu or being from the Big Island, I have a, you know, you know, a role, if you will, in going and saying, well, this is what I think you should do, and you should close this down, or you should open this up, you know. But that's just my feeling, you know, my personal.
Jackie, I think that geography does have a role in defining our Kuleana. On the one hand, we all have a responsibility to the Aina that we live on. And those who live on Molokai, for example, or Ni'ihau, have a special place. They are stakeholders in that locality. That's very important. And yet at the same time, Hawaii is more than just separate localities. We are also broad regions that belong to all of us. For example, Papahanaumokuakea, the entire vast ocean reserve out there. That's not something over which those who live out there in the ocean per se have predominant Kuleana. It's something we all are responsible for. And I like the fact that Dr. Chun mentioned Waikiki. Should what happens in Waikiki concern only those who may live there in that ahupua'a? Or is it something so significant to us as Hawaii all together that those on our neighbor islands also should have a say? So I think that stakeholdership is certainly there in terms of where we live geographically, but we're also stakeholders in all of Hawaii together. It's important for us to work together toward a better Hawaii in every sense.
Jackie, if the question is whether influence over decisions in a particular ahupua'a should be limited to the residents or those outside, really is too, it doesn't characterize the question properly. You know, for example, I might have an issue with fresh water that is affected by my neighbor damming up my access to that fresh water. And so in that ahupua'a and between neighbors, we would need to resolve that. But the policy dealing with rights to water is a broad one, and that should probably be uniform across the entire state. So if the nature of the question is personal or local, then probably the information and decision-making should be personal or local. If the question is what are the policy that should apply, then that's something that would affect all of us and therefore is not limited to the ahupua'a.
Yeah, so I agree with what everybody has said because we are kind of saying the same thing, that it really depends on the project. And from my perspective, um, it depends on the impacts of the project. Is it statewide? Does it affect everybody in the state, all Hawaiians in the state, or does it affect only the individuals in that specific community? You know, I used to go to Hana quite a bit, and so they wouldn't want somebody like me from Oahu telling them how to decide their very specific community issue. But I think for another example is Mauna Kea, where it's on the Big Island. I was born and raised on the Big Island. So I have a real affinity for the island and for the Mauna. But I think it had that, you know, that an issue has very broad and widespread impacts. So I think all Hawaiians should have a say on that. But when you come to, you know, as Dr. Akina had indicated, stakeholders, I think that's a very important perspective. You know, for example, the SHA, you know, the Sovereign Council of the Hawaiian Homestead Associations, they're all, you know, they have about 34, 35 community associations. They represent about 30,000 residents in those homeland communities and about roughly 28, 29,000 on the waiting list. And so, and they're a very defined group of beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homelands Trust. They probably wouldn't want the non-beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homelands Trust having a say in matters that affect their trust. You know, same with you know, as I said, Dr. Chun was president of Kamehameha Schools. Dr. Akina is a trustee OHA. Kimo, you know, used to work for Kamehameha Schools, the Liliuokalani Trust, the Lunalino Trust. And so they all have very defined missions. And so, you know, within their specific missions, you're going to want to have their beneficiaries, their employees, and their stakeholders have a greater say. So I think it's just a matter of how you group different individuals and organizations and geographical areas.
Thank you so much. So that leads me to wondering about lineal descendants and also Kama'aina who have moved away from our home nation here from Hawaii and are perhaps on the continental US or abroad and so forth. Do you have any thoughts related to those individuals and Native Hawaiians and where they fall in all of this? And I realize that I'm asking you about both non-resident Kama'aina and lineal descendants, some of whom are the same.
I believe we have many different ways of claiming stakeholdership here in Hawaii. There are lineal descendants who can trace their lineage back to a certain ahupua'a, and traditionally there are certain rights and certain kuleana associated with that. And then there's that vast population, which I sometimes call the diaspora, of Hawaiian people away from us, largely on mainland USA. There are about 500,000 Native Hawaiians, and about half of them, perhaps slightly more than that, have left Hawaii. And sometimes their kuleana here is not always emphasized. But I do know that many of them have not left because they're leaving Hawaii behind. They're not saying we're moving on to a world in which we are getting away from Hawaii. Many of them have left for economic reasons. Many of them have left because of the cost of housing, the lack of job opportunity here to pay the kind of salaries that are needed, and so forth. But for whatever reason, they're away from Hawaii. And I think all of this speaks to the fact, going back to your very first question, that there's not just one way to perceive who the Hawaiian people are and what our concerns are for Hawaii. We are diverse, we are dispersed as well. And I think that a Hawaii of the future needs to take advantage of technology. Communication has grown so much in this age. My mother is in Chula Vista, California today, Marion Kelii Akina, that's where she lives. And without knowing that I'm on this program here, I see on my cell phone that she has just texted me. A remarkable thing for a 94-year-old woman. But through Facebook and other means, there exists a Hawaiian community that is communicating in a way that never before. And so it's not a static thing to talk about lineal descendants and our growing Kuleana as we move away from Hawaii. It's a dynamic thing, and I'm hoping that I'll close up with this. I've spoken a little too long on this. I'm hoping that we will find ways that our Hawaiian people all over the country and the world can be as connected as possible in Hawaii in terms of ongoing concerns and having influence and being part of the community that we have here.
I'm smiling because it really resonates with me, Kelii. When I was with Kamehameha still, I would travel to the mainland and to the continent, my Ikamai, and visit with alumni and other groups, but what struck me, I commented it early on in that experience. What I commented that at that time, that goes back to the late 80s, early 90s. I guess the heart and there was a certain fervor in the hearts of these translocated Native Hawaiians and others for the culture, and the ties were a lot stronger. Or the interest. They couldn't get enough. They kept asking for more and for more. And as compared to many of us who live right here, we're so close to it, kind of take it for granted. Or at that time, at least at that time, you didn't think about it in those terms. But for my friends, my classmates, other fellow alumni, and all over the country, they were, anything we could give them, they would just gobble up, and they wanted more in terms of the culture, in terms of what was going on in the Hawaiian movement, in terms of what was going on in Hawaii. They never lost touch. You're right. They didn't leave us behind when they went. They went for other reasons, and they're there for other reasons. I mean, some of them are there for other reasons, but I think the vast majority of them have never. Let me tell you a story. I used to entertain our alumni up at Hale on campus during alumni week or throughout the year. But one alumni week, I can't remember the class, but they were celebrating their 50th graduation and reunion. And so there was a gentleman there. And so I was talking to him, and he lived on the East Coast. And I was asked about, what they did after they graduated from Kamehameha. And he went into the service, ended up on the East Coast, and married a lady there. And I don't know how it happened, but this was the first time in 50 years now that he had come back. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, what about your family? He said, oh, they always went to the East Coast. All his brothers and sisters and nephews. And he was a musician. And so he traveled along the East Coast for his entire adult life and playing music, Hawaiian music. And so so I said, I mentioned something about, like the week was coming to an end. So when are you going to go home? And he said, well, this is home. And I said, well, wait a minute now. And then I started to talk about what is home. And he said, Hawaii is my home. I said, but you haven't been here in 50 years. Where are your children and your grandchildren? They said, oh, back east. And I said, so that's home. He said, no, this is home. And I said, okay, let me ask you a question. When you die, where's your EV gonna go? He says, here. And so, you know, that was a profound moment for me because, you know, this was a man who lived his whole life on the mainland, but never, ever stopped considering Hawaii his home. And this was where he's gonna come back when it was all over. So,
Jackie, Dr. Chun expressed two thoughts that I was thinking, but he actually said, and one is taking it for granted. The Hawaiians on the mainland have that strong, as you said, Mike, hunger, connection. When I lived on the East Coast, and it sounds like you're talking about Mahina Bailey. I don't know if that's who you're speaking.
I know, but not
for years, Mahina Bailey used to travel up and down the East Coast, and I used to work on the Hill, and we always had poi, we always had dried fish, and we always had Hawaiians around us. Now, of course, didn't hurt that you were in a Hawaiian office, but the point is the intensity of the feeling is actually amplified when you're far away from home. And so the input of Hawaiians, wherever they are, is useful and it's helpful and it's an important part of us as a people, I think.
So, Jackie, when you talk about lineal descendants, I think about also cultural descendants. And, you know, the cultural descendants are, you know, the words are words of art in business. When I say business, I'm talking about, you know, project development. So when there's a project that's, you know, real estate project that's being developed, there's a requirement that you consult with the cultural descendants who are really the lineal descendants of that the respective ahupua'a. And so I think that's a good thing. You know, the reason I say it's a good thing is because most of the issues that are being dealt with in those kinds of projects are iwi kupuna. And so it's a good thing that a defined group of cultural descendants or lineal descendants have a responsibility to do the conservation and protection and the care of the iwi kupuna, just by way of example. The other thing that really strikes me when you talk about lineal descendants or cultural descendants is, you know, obviously Native Hawaiians are indigenous people. We are Polynesians. And another Polynesian group that I spend a fair amount of time with are the Maori in New Zealand. And so the Maori are very different from the Hawaiians in the sense that the Maori organize by tribe. And because they're from different regions, you know, they have tribal maraes and cultures, and they interact internally with each other, and then they collaborate with the other tribes for cultural matters as well as business matters. And so when they go away, whether it's a lot of them go to Australia, they still relate back to the tribe, and they come back to the tribe, and you know, so I think it's we're all indigenous, we're all Polynesians, but because of the way we've grown and developed as a people in different parts of Polynesia, we just we group differently. But I think your question is a good one. I think a lot of us think about like family. Where do we descend from? What ahupua'a? What city? What island?
What high
Thank
school?
you so much. Go ahead, Dr. Chun.
No, I was just going to say what high school.
Exactly. Exactly.
Excellent point. I'm always reminding people that when they come to Hawaii and ask us what school, or we ask them, what school did you go to? We really don't care that you went to Harvard. We want to know that you went to Kamehameha or McKinley or Punahou.
Well,
go ahead.
Place is very important to our culture, right? In our culture, people and place. And when I don't know, I'm not a, you know, scholar in this sense, but you know, when we ask what high school you're going for, especially because the vast majority of the kids are going to public schools, you know, either graduating from public schools or spend part of their time in a public school. And so when you ask them the question, you know, I went to Farrington or I went to Kauku, what they're really telling you is this is my place. I'm from Kalihi, or I'm from Waianae, or I'm from Nanakuli. You know, it kind of gives that identity. Of course, the kids who are going to the private schools, you know, you can't tell, you know, especially now that only Kameme has a boarding program. But you know, that's, you know, when we talk about high schools, that's that other element too, because it gives you a sense of place, and that's very important to Hawaiians.
So I used to, many years ago, I was talking to this advisor. He was like a consultant. He traveled all over the country. And so he said it really interesting, the kinds of questions that people ask you depending on the region of the country you're from. If you're from the South, they ask you, who's your grandmammy and your grandpappy? You're from the East Coast, they ask you, what college did you graduate from? If you're from the West Coast in Los Angeles, they'll ask you, what corporation do you work for? And he said, when you come to Hawaii, they ask you, what high school do you graduate from? And what Mike says is really true, that I think the high school you come from, it's a really telling, the answer to that question is very telling and very informative. So I graduated from St. Joe's High School in Hilo. So when people ask me, you graduated from St. Joe High School, that means you're from Hilo, you're probably Catholic, and so you know you organize in a specific region. So I think, you know, that question is it's a very insightful question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is there any way to achieve consent or consensus when we have such diverse individuals and groups that we're speaking to and trying to honor and be respectful to?
Depends on what you're talking about. And I think we all can agree on values. For example, in my generation, we were informed by people like Pilahi Paki, Kavena Pukui, Malia Craver, who were the vessels of culture for people who grew up in the 70s. And so when Pilahi Paki talked about aloha, that it meant akahai, or kindness, lokahi, working together, olu olu, being pleasant, or ha'aha'a, humility, and ahunui, patience. Those values that she expressed as being the meaning of aloha is something that universally would be recognized as Hawaiian. And to the extent that we have voices in our community that are not kind, that are not interested in working together, or pleasant, or humble, or patient, at least makes me wonder how Hawaiian that could be, both in terms of its action and its goals. So values mean something in all cultures, and our values, I'll just say, are better than many other cultures. I'm sorry, I'm prejudiced as Hawaiian. Hey, yo, you know, the original question is, who are the Hawaiians? Well, we are Hawaiian, and we know it because our culture taught us certain things. Now, consensus, I don't know. Depends on what the question is.
Yeah, I agree with, I really agree with Kimo in terms, it depends what the question is. And, you know, I think that, I agree, you know, I think we can all agree on the values, those values. But, you know, there's some other values that I could cite that are very Hawaiian and perhaps might even be considered as quote unquote Western values. For example, you know, Kuleana, you know, this drive to be perfect, this drive for excellence. That's very Hawaiian, and set, you know, not settling for second place, is to push and to, that the greatest example, I mean, not the greatest, but one of the finest example is Kamehameha Ikahi. He was a warrior, and he had warrior characteristics and warrior values. But he also had that, what Kim was talking about, he had that compassion. And so that's the other part of it. But, depending upon, I think the other common ground, I think, is what I think Ivan had pointed out earlier, the sense of injustice. I don't think that there's any disagreement among Native Hawaiians in our group, wherever you might be, that there's a disagreement on our history and the injustice that that happened to us, and how we, how we have come to where we are today. I think that there's some, that's strong common ground. We may just disagree on points along that journey and how we dealt with some of these things and how we're dealing with it today. I think that, I think TNT and Mauna Kea might be one. There's Hawaiians on both sides of these issues, on this issue. And both have very strong feelings and that need to be respected, listened to, understood. Not necessary to agreement. I mean, what society in the world has, even in dictatorships, you see what you don't see, people down there having different views. We all have different ideas. We all have different views. And so Kim was absolutely right. It's really depends upon what we're talking about. But I think in terms of the values that he's pointed out, and then, what Ivan pointed out about our history, I think that ties all of us together. And we can't forget that. We may have different ideas on how to correct it and how to deal with it, but we can, we're standing shoulder to shoulder in that regard.
I agree with Dr. Chun and Kimo when it comes to values. We actually have a consensus. We emerge from a consensus, a historical consensus, in terms of virtue, in terms of Hawaiian values that I think have grown as we've come into the modern world. George Kanahele wrote a beautiful book, Kuleana, in which he talks about the fundamental Hawaiian values and shows how they interacted with Christian values as well, and how aloha, for example, which had meant love for your husband, wife, love for your children, love for your community, expanded into love for all mankind through the Christian model, as Kanahele points that out. We come from that consensus. As that is a given. But where we're going, however, is new territory. There are issues in which we will not have consensus. And part of being Hawaiian is allowing each other to choose a position different than the one that I have. Mauna Kea is a great example. There are beloved friends, family of mine on all sides of the issue. And I say all sides because it's not just two sides of the issue as to what should be the disposition of Mauna Kea and what can be allowed and what cannot be allowed and so forth. I don't think that we will achieve consensus as to that. I think our consensus comes before that. We have come from a consensus as to how to be and what is pono. And I hope that we can carry into the diversity of opinion and diversity of positions that we have the consensus over our values, such as ho'oponopono. That has to be a practice as to how we treat one another with respect to issues such as Mauna Kea. Now, I think that one of the reasons that consensus may not be the goal or be necessary in all things is because of the rights that we have developed as Hawaiians. The 1840 Constitution under King Kamehameha III was a remarkable document that said it's not just the ali'i who can have their way. They must be restrained. It is all the people from ali'i down through maka'ainana who have the rights to make choices for themselves, to determine how they will live, to be protected for their speech and so forth. This remarkable document showed that no matter what another person believes, we need to respect that. So I think that the consensus of our culture, our virtue, our aloha, our lifestyle needs to be the backdrop for recognizing that we're going to have different opinions. We're going to land in different political positions. We're going to make different choices, and that other person has as much right to be different as I have to have an opinion or an idea.
So, I think there are two things on which maybe unstated, but I think two things that Hawaiians agree on, even though they don't talk about it in a way of saying that this is what we have consensus on. But I think we all agree that we all want our people to have better health, better education, better jobs, affordable and secure housing, safe environment. We want to reduce the negative parts that impact our people, the population in prisons, the statistics dealing with poor health and homelessness and so forth. So I think we all agree. We all want a better life for our people, and we all agree that we want to do what we can to uplift all of our brothers and sisters, who are in need of uplifting. I think the second thing that we can all agree on is what Dr. Chun talked about. We all agree that history has not treated our people well, and maybe for the people outside of Hawaii, I'll share a little bit, because I think everybody on this panel and a lot of people from Hawaii understand what I'm talking about. What we're talking about is in the area of health, culture, sovereignty, and land. In the area of health, the Native Hawaiian race was almost become extinct as a result of not having immunities to Western diseases when there was contact with the West. In the area of culture, when we had contact with the West, Westerners attempted to suppress the native language, the religion, the dress. Our ahupua system was dismantled. In the area of sovereignty, we know that the monarchy was illegally overthrown in 1893, and there was an annexation to the United States in 1898. We know that almost 1.8 million acres of crown lands and government lands, which belonged to the Hawaiian government and the Hawaiian ali'i, were seized and given to the United States, and they're now called ceded lands. And we all know that there have been really efforts in trying to address these injustices. As Mike said, there's a different way of approaching it, but I think Mauna Kea shows that we have different approaches there. But I think historically, our people have really tried, our leaders, our ali'i have really tried to address these injustices and the negative impacts in the way of poor health, poor education, inadequate housing have arisen from these injustices. And I say, for example, the responses by our ali'i. Our ali'i responded to these negative impacts in different areas. as I indicated, Dr. Chun was president of Community of Schools. Princess Bernice Pawahi Bishop dedicated her lands for education. Queen Emma Kinkamehameha IV founded Queen's Hospital, brought the Episcopalian religion to Hawaii and set up the St. Andrew's Cathedral, and set up, Queen Emma founded the St. Andrew's Priory School for Girls. Prince Kohio Kalanianaole went to Congress and lobbied them to set up the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which was designed to transfer about 200,000 acres into the Hawaiian Homeland Trust to provide housing. Lunalilo was, his trust was for elderly care. Queen Liliuokalani had a trust to address the Native orphans and indigent people. OHA was created by the Constitutional Convention in 1978 in order to assure that the 20% of the revenues from the Public Lands Trust were directed into OHA to advance the betterment of Native Hawaiians. And so I think there are a lot of areas in which we can agree on, even though it's really clear in what areas it's really hard to agree on.
Great. Thank you so much for those thought-provoking responses and insights. So we've made mention here of iwi kupuna and ho'oponopono and shared values. And this leads me to wonder, how do we reconcile when various Hawaiian groups don't agree? For example, some of you brought up sovereignty and Hawaiian Kingdom versus federal recognition. We've had mention of astronomy on Mauna Kea and Haleakala. So how do we reconcile when various Hawaiian groups don't agree? Perhaps one or more of you could discuss the concepts of iwi kupuna and ho'oponopono and how that relates, and how should we resolve disagreements?
Jackie, those are such two different topics. Whether we're going to talk about bones or we're going to talk about a dispute resolution process like ho'oponopono. But let's put the bones aside just for a moment. In terms of the traditional way of resolving disputes, if you're going to use ho'oponopono, ho'oponopono requires a commitment to honestly face the facts that generated whatever the dispute was, a commitment to act in good faith, to accept responsibility for the wrong or transgression, as well as a responsibility to forgive, to resolve the dispute. Good faith is the connection through each step of this process, where the parties have to enter into that process with the responsibility, the agreement that they will act in good faith regarding the facts, their responsibility for causing the dispute, as well as responsibility for crafting whatever the solution is. So to the extent that the parties are in a dispute that don't agree or on the facts, or may not be acting in good faith for a resolution because there could be another agenda. There could be a political reason why the dispute in and of itself is useful as a political matter. You can generate a lot of fundraising off of a continuing dispute. You can stir up and recruit supporters. If the past 5 years in the era of President Trump has taught us that you can motivate people as long as you can identify an enemy or target, even with lies, even with clear demonstrative misrepresentation. Hawaiians are not any different than any other group. We are susceptible to manipulation all the time. It is our responsibility, however, to at least insist upon honesty in fact. We're all entitled to our own opinions, but not to our own facts. And to the extent that we, in good faith, will accept responsibility for whatever we have done, as well as responsibility for crafting a solution, then you have hope that you could craft a Hawaiian informed type of resolution. Otherwise, it's just a process of messaging and manipulation. And without that consensus, or I shouldn't say consensus. I mean, really, is that the point of our world, to get consensus, to get everybody to agree? No, it really is, what are the facts? What are the responsibilities, and see if we can, in good faith, work towards a resolution. Anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, you know, my when you were talking and when the question was raised, you know, I was thinking, you know, I asked the question, why should there be consensus? You know, why should we expect that there be consensus? You know, given that in many ways, we're no different than any other group of people, you know, in terms of how they view various issues. You know, you go to different countries, you know, they have different views on some of their the issues that are taking place in their lands. And so, yeah, I agree with Kimo on that, and what he's articulated.
I agree with both Dr. Chun and Kimo. There should be consensus where we can build consensus. And it should be a growing consensus. And the areas around which we can build consensus are the basic needs. For example, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs has a fiduciary duty given to us by the Constitution to work for the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians. And when we talk about the conditions of Native Hawaiians, we're talking about housing, we're talking about jobs, economic development, education, health. These are things around which we can all build broad consensus to provide for the betterment of the conditions. That's important. And I think it's important for us to practice a lifestyle of ho'oponopono, as Kimo has mentioned. I think that the way we go forward and broaden that area of consensus is by treating each other with the highest level of respect, forgiving one another, cooperating. And as we build that area as broad as we can, the broadest consensus where we work in an inclusive way with each other, it allows us to provide the platform for difference. So there's consensus, a broad consensus, but then there's also difference. It allows us to have in our Hawaiian community those who believe in a complete separation of a sovereign nation apart from the United States, and at the same time those who believe harmony with the United States is a practice that can be achieved, and every shade within. It's a broad consensus that is so broad and so strong that it allows us to have those who have one vision of Mauna Kea and those who have another their vision of Mauna Kea. And the strength of our ability to be together and have consensus on the basic things gives us the platform for difference and the competition of ideas, so that in time, when we listen to each other respectfully, we come up with even broader consensus. And if that process just keeps going on and we allow each other the difference, I think we are much better off for that.
Yeah, we have consensus among the four of us. And so
Great minds.
You know, as we've all said, you know, the first question is, do we speak with one voice? Obviously, Hawaiians don't speak with one voice, and there's a reason for that. You know, we all come from different points of view. We have different organizations. We have different positions. So there should be an acknowledgement that on many issues we will not agree, and just acknowledge we will not agree. But I think one thing we can focus on is, as Dr. Akina had indicated, is to disagree with respect and with aloha. And so it reminds me of a story. One of our beloved Native Hawaiian leaders, Senator Daniel Akaka. I used to spend a fair amount of time with him. I ran his campaign when he ran for Congress in 1976 and when he ran for the Senate in 1990. And so when he retired from the US Senate, I used to chat with him periodically, and he would come back from, he had just come, one of those occasions, he had come back from the University of Hawaii, And he says, I went to the University of Hawaii and I was talking to all these folks and all these students, and they had very interesting kinds of questions. And I said, like, what kind of questions? What was interesting? He said, well, one question was they asked me, you are a US Senator. You're retired now, but you're a US Senator. What value do you think you brought to the US Senator being a Native Hawaiian? And I said, what did you tell him? He said, I told him this story. He said, when I went around as a US Senator, I used to go all around the world and I'd meet with world leaders one-on-one. I met with Mikhail Gorbachev in his apartment one-on-one. I met with Deng Xiaoping one-on-one, Musharraf from Pakistan. And so we met just ourselves. And he said it was really fascinating what they all said. They all said the same thing. This was a little bit different period. What they said was, you know, Senator Keaka, you are from Hawaii. You are a native Hawaiian. And you have come from a culture of where you respect each other, you build bridges among people. Please help us build a better relationship with the United States of America because we want to be part of the global community. And so I think the point here is that Hawaiians have as their major asset their commitment to their culture, the commitment to love and caring in the spirit of aloha. And that's what Senator Keaka was saying. I took that spirit of aloha around the world and they saw that and I could use that. They wanted us from Hawaii to help build bridges among people, among nations.
Ivan, I was staff, DC staff in the second Reagan term.
Wow.
And I was sent to Vic Fazio's, Representative Fazio's office with the world's ugliest pineapple, this scrawny little pineapple. I go to Representative Fazio's office. I'm ushered right into his private office with open arms, and the representative from California hugged me, looked at the pineapple, almost teary-eyed, and then shook my hand. And he said, tell Danny, he gets his radar dome. The congressman was a walking, talking embodiment of aloha. And for anybody who doesn't appreciate or understand the power of Hawaiian culture, the value of Hawaiian culture, is that when we live our values, you don't have to threaten, fight, be obnoxious, pound the table, lie, cheat. Who he was as powerful as being Speaker of the House, and at that time was Tip O'Neill. And so we were fortunate that we had Dan Inouye and Senator Keaka, one who was the brilliant master strategist, and the other one who was just loved for who and what he was. That's an important and powerful message that we can give not only our brothers and sisters in the Hawaiian community, but the world, which is what Pila Hipaki felt, that aloha was the key.
Oh, thank you all so much. I'd like to ask each of you to, yeah, Dr. Chun, I was going to say, let's each of you do our wrap up. And if you could make your comments.
Yeah, this is almost 1 hour. Okay. No, I was just going to say that maybe that's the voice of the Hawaiian people, the voice of aloha. And, you know, that's what we're talking about. And, you know, I just, I'll yield my time to others, but that's the point I was going to try to make. I didn't want to lose that thought. You know, when you get my age, you forget, right? And so by the time it came around, I'm going to forget that thought. So go ahead.
Mahalo, Jackie. Consensus isn't our goal. Understanding might be, and guided and informed by our core values. That's really what we can offer. That's what makes us different from people, whether they're in the mainland or in China. Everybody and every culture and every people has something to offer. What we are unique in is with our core values, aloha being at the center, informed by other values like Dr. Chun suggested, excellence in Hawaiian, ku'upono. The same word for honesty is our word for excellence. If that is informing what we do, I think we've got a chance to succeed. Mahalo.
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 the-
Go ahead, Dr. Akina.
Mahalo to the Hawaii Island Economic Board for putting this on today, and to my colleagues on the panel. What an honor to be here with you. I truly believe that there's great hope for the Hawaiian people as we move forward in the most valuable thing we have, the spirit of aloha. It's as simple as a little Bible verse, aloha ke kahi I ke kahi. We build consensus as we love one another, and as we respect the fact that there may be areas where we can't have consensus. It's been a real privilege to be here with you today. Mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo. I joined Dr. Akina in the same message. Mahalo nui to the Hawaii Island Economic Development Board for allowing us to share our mana'o here today. And I want to say to the other panelists, it's been great fun, great joy being with you guys. But the last thing is that, you know, aloha is a very powerful message. And as we all know, there's great division in our country. And so I've always hoped that Hawaii would be the leader in trying to build bridges among people. We have a real opportunity because, you know, we're so diverse and there's no one dominant ethnic group, and we got the spirit of love and aloha from our culture. And so and I agree with the three others who've spoken that that's an asset, that's a tool that we should use to help make the world a better place. Kenny Brown was a really messenger of how do we make the world a better place for everybody.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. This has been my privilege. What an honor to have this opportunity to talk story with you, to get your mana'o. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone, not just at the Economic Development Board, but everyone who has joined us today in saying mahalo and thank you so much for these wonderful insights. And with that, be respectful of everyone's time. If I could segue back to our chair, Nahua.
I hope you found today's comments and perspectives from the Native Hawaiians, Dr. Kelii Akina, Dr. Michael Chun, and our attorneys, Ivan Lui-Kwan and James Mauliola Keaka Stone, interesting and informative. Mahalo to our panelists for sharing their mana'o. We recorded today's presentation and we'll be sending you an email with a link to YouTube that you can share with others. We also will be hosting another webinar in August with different panelists. Join us next month as fresh Native Hawaiian voices give their perspectives on, should the military continue to train at Puhakaloa? Let us all work together to make this place a better island for our keiki. I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode of Native Hawaiian Perspectives in August. Mahalo.
Mahalo, everyone. Thank you.